So today's Rise Up is called Reclaiming Control. If you're into that sort of thing, who doesn't want to be in control? And I've done an episode before, so this is kind of part two. I did an episode that you can go find in my podcast, Rise Up with Dragon, called Control Freak. And, I'm always into good word or bad word. Control freak, that idea is considered a bad word. There's a bad connotation to it. But if you think about it, everything that we're trying to do in life has to do with us on some level becoming in control.
Great morning, world! Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon!
Great morning, world. This is your boy, Dragon. Great to be here. I've got my breaking news, I don't care shirt on. So I want to open up by reminding people what that means. It means that I care, but I don't really care about the things that don't matter. So in the spirit of everything that I do with the interface response system, I want to offer that to everybody. I want to give you permission to care about things that matter today and that you can control and that support, and people that support where you're going, and permission to not care about anything else. You have that right. So great morning, world. Couple of quickies. I'm on day 5 right now of a 90-day commitment to just leveling up with my physical, my mental, and my financial. I mean, I always do rise ups and stuff, and I'm a pretty disciplined guy, but there's always room for growth. So me and just a ton of other people are embarking on this 90-day thing. So if you're interested in that, just reach out to me and I'll share with you what I'm doing. But the principle is real simple. And I want to encourage anybody listening, whatever day you're listening to this, to just look at the idea that habits are formed over 90 days. If you do something for 90 days, you'll become unconsciously competent at it. So there's a lot of value in that. And then the other thing I would say is don't do what somebody else is doing because you think you're supposed to. Make your own commitment and just make sure you push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone at least so that you can grow. If you commit to doing the same thing that you've always done for 90 days, you will end up exactly where you are. Second, I just want to give a shout out to Jane, who's going to be on my podcast. You want to hear an amazing story. You want to just about, sexual abuse as a child and just this amazing journey that this woman has gone on. And she's now advocating for that. She's going to be on my show on Monday. And she recommended, I think it was her, she recommended a book, or somebody did. And that's the next book I'm reading. I like to share the books I'm reading. I'm going to start reading Emotional Agility. And why am I reading that? It's by Susan David. The reason why I'm reading that is because I like the idea of becoming agile with my emotions. Very, very interface response system. So today's Rise Up is called Reclaiming Control. If you're into that sort of thing, who doesn't want to be in control? And I've done an episode before, so this is kind of part two. I did an episode that you can go find in my podcast, Rise Up with Dragon, called Control Freak. And, I'm always into good word or bad word. Control freak, that idea is considered a bad word. There's a bad connotation to it. But if you think about it, everything that we're trying to do in life has to do with us on some level becoming in control. So I'm going to jump into this in a second, but I just want to give you a thought. I had a thought this morning that stimulated me writing after I did this write-up, another Rise Up. I'm going to have a guest on the next episode, and then we're going to have this amazing guy that a lot of you know, and you should go check out his podcast. His name is Doug Wood, and everybody calls him The Real Doug Wood. I think that's the name of his podcast. But he and I are going to have an amazing discussion next week on Friday, and that'll be live, just about the idea of looking at success and how people can get away with so much and still achieve success. And other people try so hard and never achieve it. So we're going to kind of like dissect success. It's a pretty interesting thing. So that prompted me to also have this idea of this concept of victimhood. I was talking to Chicken this morning before I get into the podcast. And when you listen to the podcast, you lose all the throat clearings and the repetitive words that I'm saying. So if you like that, you can go listen to that. And then I want to say hi to the folks that are on the Clubhouse room. So if you want to find me on Clubhouse, I always have an after party after and discuss the topic. If anybody has anything to say, you can find me at Make Sense. So anyway, I was talking about victimhood with Chicken. And what we realized is that being a victim is actually a voluntary job, which is why it sucks so much. So I'm going to have a future Rise Up, and I started writing about it. And it's going to be called Necessary. And it's going to be really, really cool about just, what's necessary and what's not in life. Think about the idea of like what's necessary to you. It's kind of like a close cousin to what's important to you. So let's jump into this. Here's how the reclaiming control concept came up. So I was talking to Chicken. We always have our own Rise Up in the morning. And the other day, and I noticed that she was interacting with her mother, and she tried to FaceTime her mother. FaceTime because her parents are in South Africa. So we always try to talk to them and our daughter with FaceTime. So Chicken was trying to FaceTime her mother. And it was right after her mother texted her and said, "Hey, I'm available, FaceTime me." So then Chicken went to FaceTime her, and she looked at, and it didn't work. Her mother didn't pick up. You ever had that? Like sometimes my mom will say, "Call me," and I'll call her and she doesn't pick up, or I'll call her and she'll say, "Oh, I can't talk right now." So anyway, I just noticed that Chicken, when she noticed she couldn't do it, she was frustrated. And she looked at me and she said, "This is so frustrating." So in our family, we're always using the IRS and having these conversations, stepping back and looking at things. So I asked her if she was aware of why it frustrated her. That's always an interesting thing when you experience something like frustration. Ask yourself why, distance yourself from it. Right? So we both agreed that it was because what happened was out of her control and she wanted to be in control of the scenario. So when that happened, I was like, oh man, I got to go jump back in a podcast about control. And I was just ironically reading about control as well. So think about that. She wasn't in control of an uncontrollable scenario. Like she couldn't control that her mother wasn't on the phone. So here are some of my thoughts on that. So human beings have a strong preference to controllable experiences over uncontrollable experiences. So think about, what's your preference? Do you prefer to be in an experience that's in your control or out of your control? It's kind of a silly way of looking at it, meaning we don't like the feeling of being out of control. So this preference to be in control, this preference actually has created this fascinating relationship over time, somewhat obsessive relationship over time with the perception of things that are associated with being out of control. So remember, in this learning the interface response system, a big part of it is recognizing that this amygdala, your brain, is just programmed to recognize, based on past experience, recognize things that are dangerous or, not preferable, right? So when you have this desire to live a certain way and be in control, you become super analytical of things that are out of your control. So that's an interesting thing. So what I find interesting about that behavior is how we tend to distract ourselves from that uneasy feeling. So as soon as that's why we got to slow things down. But as soon as you realize something's out of your control or potentially uneasy or undesirable, one of the first things that we'll do is we'll distract ourselves from that uneasy feeling of being out of control. So a big part of the uneasy thing that you don't like, or even danger, right? The very nature of danger and those things that we look to get away from, it's connected to the idea of being out of control. Like, I don't like the idea of, as a caveman, I don't like the idea of walking out of my cave and a saber-toothed tiger attacking me. I don't have a lot of control over that. So if I want to claim control over that, I'm going to stay inside, right? And never eat. So that's probably why they used to die. So we have this tendency of distracting ourselves with things like, I don't know if these things sound familiar to you, but like drinking, drugs, overeating is a distraction as well. You know that one of the number, I do a lot of this work. One of the number one reasons people eat crappy food is because they're bored and they want to distract themselves from this idea of having nothing to do. So drinking, drugs, overeating, also being mean. Do you know that when you're mean to somebody, you're doing that to distract yourself from somebody or from an uneasy feeling? One of the things that I notice in using the interface response system is that when somebody attacks me or says something mean to me, if I look at it holographically and I take some time, I'll always find that it actually doesn't have anything to do with me. They're using me as a way of distracting themselves from something else. If somebody is insecure or they have low self-esteem, they'll have a tendency of trying to put somebody else down to elevate themselves, which makes sense. So what happens is people, will be mean to other people in this sense, or do all these distracting things with the intention of escaping this undesired and uncontrollable state. So only to find on the other side of it, of that brief euphoric state that you create. Do you know that when you're mean to somebody, it actually creates a euphoric state? But that brief euphoric state that we've become more out of control, and everybody kind of knows this, right? We start saying, I'm sliding down a hole or something like that. One thing leads to another. So when clients come to me, they typically tell me things like they want to lose weight, they want to make more money, they want to create more time freedom, they want to get, spiritually intact with the source or whatever it is. All these things represent the opposite of their current reality. It's interesting when somebody asks me for help with something, all those things I just mentioned, what they're really saying in another way is, I want to feel differently than I am. So they're typically mentioning the opposite of their current reality. And it's interesting to evaluate that these realities, asking things like, I love to ask people, like, if somebody says they want to lose weight, I'll say, so do you have a weight problem? Right? It's interesting to ask somebody that. Or I'll ask, so do you have a lack of money problem? And this is typical behavior, right? When people will say, here's my symptom and my side effect, that's my problem. So it's typical behavior, and they're unconscious. Remember, most of our problems is that we're just unconscious of stuff. A big part of my system is just stepping back and becoming conscious. They're unconscious to the fact that their real struggle lies not in the symptom of or side effect of something like being overweight, right? It's actually from an upstream problem or cause like lifestyle or emotional mismanagement. Stop there for a second and just think about emotional mismanagement, because that's probably the number one cause of dis-ease in our world, is our inability to handle and manage and react and respond to our emotions, right? So those are the upstream things. But my point in the control sense is that when people come and they're looking to alleviate a side effect and a symptom, what they're really doing is trying to reclaim control. So if I say to these people, sure, I'll help you with that. So let's say you say, I want to lose weight. And I say, sure, I'll help you lose weight. And I know inherently that that's not the real problem. Well, I wouldn't actually be helping you if I did that, because it's a temporary bandage. It's actually another sense of a distraction. I would actually be playing as a coach into distracting somebody. It's a temporary bandage for the real issue that needs to be addressed upstream. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because when you're in an acute state, whether it's pain or out of controlness, right? And you just want right there, your urgency, your desire is to feel a little bit better. Sometimes as a servant, as a coach or a friend, I do need to help you feel a little bit better before you can gain the clarity to see something else. So it's dangerous when somebody's like urgently needing like air because their head's underwater. You don't want to stop and be like, well, it's not really the air that you need, right? You might want to just let them get a little air before you have that conversation. So nonetheless, their reality creates the feeling that symptom and the side effect they're feeling, which is sometimes an emotion that makes you be mean or run away from things or shut down, fight, flight, or freeze. So the reality creates the feeling of being out of control in the areas of their life. And I know what they're truly asking for when they're asking me for help. They're asking me unconsciously, they're asking me to reclaim control. So I had a great idea. You guys are going to love this. I had a really great idea for like a Super Bowl or like an Olympic commercial. So I had this idea that I would show all of these images of distractions, like I would show images of like yummy junk food, like Doritos, soda, hostess cakes, fast food restaurants. I would show somebody like getting high, smoking pot or doing some drugs or anything like that. Any of these things that people enjoy as distractions, being mean to somebody or whatever, overeating, right? I would show all those images and people will be like, yeah, that's my thing. And then I would follow it by an advertisement of my, like this healthy dragon coach and my program. The advertisement would then say, reclaim control from those bastards. I think there's a lot of power in helping people see that what they're really trying to do is reclaim control from the distraction that they're involved in. And then you'll have the ability, hopefully, to show them what they're really distracting themselves from, right? But it's all about, think about your state right now. To what degree are you in control? And I'm going to talk about perceived control as well. So there is a massive business going on. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a massive business going on that supplies the demand. That's what business is, supply and demand. It supplies the demand for control. So what I'm saying here is I think the demand is actually control. I mean, it happens in war, politics, everything, everybody. As a matter of fact, anytime you choose to be right and make a statement with an exclamation point, the nature of trying to be right is trying to validate yourself, but to some degree, control things. And by the way, it's not a bad word to be in control. I think it's something that we all want to do. Because remember in the beginning, I said, what would you prefer? What's your preference to do? Controllable things or out of control things? Like nobody's like, I'm going to get out of control today. Actually, when you go out drinking, sometimes you'll say that. Like in college, you'd be like, let's get out of control, right? So I guess there is an upside to out of control. So there's this massive business going on that supplies that demand for people to be in control. The only problem is that it fuels, here's the real challenge for it. Because I said, if you want to be in control and there's a company or there's business models in this whole industry that gives you these things to potentially even temporarily claim control, there's an upside to that. It's fueling the demand, right? But the only problem is that it's fueling deeper levels of the feeling of losing control, like providing products that give temporary relief, like, I don't know, cocaine, right? You'll notice that there's always on the other side of the relief is this lower low. Being mean to somebody, then you feel bad. God, overeating, then you feel like you overate and the scale says you're fat, drinking, you get a hangover. But what's interesting is when you're involved in the uneasy, uncontrollable feeling, like withdrawal or something like that, and then you look at the distraction, you don't see the other side of it and you don't consider it. So it makes sense. And I totally understand it. And I've been involved in some of that stuff as well. So the addiction game begins in that area, right? You can get addicted to being a control freak because, it's this positive feedback loop. Even though there's a negative associated with it, as soon as you recover from the negative, you go back to it. So it's important to become conscious of this stuff and recognize where it's showing up in your life. Because that's where the addiction game begins. And that's an unconscious thing when you're addicted. And we take, one step forward and 5 steps back in life. And I think everybody, a big aspect of claiming control is having the ability to move forward, forward moving process. So what's the solution? Well, first, as I always say, when I teach the interface response system, the first step is to become aware of this process. So that's why I started with that. I want everybody to just become aware. We forgive you for you know not what is going on, right? There's this process with the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. It's like it's happening before you know it's happening. But now if you step back from it, you can actually say, okay, I understand that that's happening. right? And sometimes it's hard to catch and slow it down, which is why I teach people, if you just say that word, it'll slow the process down. So what's the solution? You first become conscious of it, that process that's running its program. So remember something, when the amygdala, right, that part of your brain that sets off alarms, when it senses the uncontrollable state or the danger, it fires off an alarm. And what it does immediately, I've spoken about this many times, is it sells the idea with the memories stored in your hippocampus. It sells and pitches in a second, in a split second, less than a second. It pitches the idea to the CEO of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, and it tries to get them to buy in and make this executive decision to act out and partake in the desired distraction. So think about that. Because if I ask somebody, hey, do you think it's a good idea to distract yourself from that uneasy feeling and do drugs, drinking, or overeat? Rationally, they'll be able to say no, right? But when it's actually happening, the reason why you partake in it before you think about it is because you're not consciously distancing yourself from it. This is an automatic response. And that's the danger of addiction. It happens before you know it. How many times have you done something stupid and not known until after you did it, right? And you experienced the low or the downside. So by using the IRS, the interface response system, and pausing with an open and curious thought, right? Pausing, right? You intercept the whole concept of that. And this is how you can claim control. Remember, we're going over the solution. You can intercept, the madness that's happening, that unconscious controlled thing. All you got to do is slow down, the power of the pause, and pausing with an open and curious thought. So if you become open and curious and you go, and you observe like, holy crap, that just happened, right? I almost was mean to my spouse when I don't want to, and there's no value in that. Like, wait a second, this morning I said that I was going to eat healthy and stay on program. And here I am looking at a piece of pizza and a beer, right? So if you slow that down, cognitive distancing, you gain access to that potentially more rational part of your brain. So that is the solution if you're looking for control. If you want to reclaim control of your life, slow the heck down. Slow the heck down. So therapists call that, as I frequently say, cognitive distancing, and use techniques like CBT, and basically they're just teaching people to slow down and contemplate and observe and describe things rather than buy in and give it value and just unconsciously, like a zombie, react to it. So those techniques are just there to question what would be a better choice. I think everybody would benefit from setting a goal every day to just contemplate what would be the optimal way, the optimal choice. That's what I teach people in my program. So it's interesting to recognize here the difference between stress and perceived stress. Think about that. Stress versus perceived stress. A loss of control is actually really a perceived loss of control. What's interesting about losing control is if you stop and think about it, you might find that you're actually not out of control. You just thought you were. So there's a difference between stress and perceived stress. By the way, somebody asked me the other day about all these ideas that I come up with on my Rise Up, and asked me if I'd do drugs. I used to do a lot of drugs when I was younger, but I actually don't. I barely even drink now. So no, I'm not high. I just think a lot. So a perceived stress versus stress. So a loss of control is really perceived loss of control, which again is based on the memories stored in your brain, your hippocampus. So remember, if your amygdala has one job and it's to sound an alarm, right? That's what it has when it notices an event or happening that even remotely hints or resembles some sort of past negative event, right? Like, let's say you failed a math test, right? Or had an embarrassing self-confidence issue due to your weight or something like that. Let's say you've had that, had meaning in the past. Your amygdala will sound an alarm if it even senses anything closely connected to that. Like even if you took like a history exam or something like that, it's interesting if you could have this experience where you could feel out of control when there's nothing to validate it. Like, let's say you failed a test in math. Like that was my point. Let's say you failed the test in math, but you have straight A's in history and you're taking a history test. Your brain, your amygdala could fire off and say, you suck at school. And you might actually unconsciously forget, actually, I'm really good at this topic. So this is an important thing because you could be failing at things that you're actually really good at because of this process. Or if you're invited to a party, like with great barbecue food, as they mistakenly resemble a past negative event. Like if you've screwed up at a party before, you might feel out of control and you might say, I can't come. Right. So wouldn't you agree that what you really want to do is be in control? Sometimes we use a technique and a strategy of withdrawing ourselves from the situation, because we think that we're going to get out of control. We try to jump ahead of it. So you can trust your amygdala as it doesn't, or I'm sorry, you can't trust your amygdala, this alarm system, because it doesn't have a dial or a gauge. It doesn't have a volume control on it, right? It's either on or off. So that's an important part of this process, is to know that your brain is going to fire off an alarm, right? Really, really important to look at that. So control comes from the interruption of what happens after the alarm, right? And the communication and the selling to like the decision maker, the prefrontal cortex. That's why you want to slow things down. That's the system. So if you're feeling out of control and stressed for a prolonged amount of time, right? Sometimes we'll say, well, this is different because I've been doing this for a long time, right? They sell it to me. Do you know that when you're selling your victim status to somebody else, you're actually further selling it to yourself? Look at me. I'm selling all these thoughts that I have to myself by speaking about them right now. So careful, words are things. So if you're feeling out of control and stressed for a prolonged amount of time, it can cause legitimate dis-ease in your body, like actual sickness. We all know that stress is connected to dis-ease and sickness in your body as your system needs a break. Think about that. Your system needs a break after, a certain amount of time, and it needs to reboot and decompress, just like somebody that sprints. How about those Olympics? I'm enjoying those. So it's wired to go all in. This system that you have is wired to go all in, this out of control stress response system. It's wired to go all in, but then after be all out, and rest while your screaming kid finally goes to sleep, right? And your mother-in-law finally leaves and stops like trying to dictate and clean everything in the house, right? Or maybe your angry partner, right? And who's freaking you out and they're angry and yelling and stuff like that. A big part of that equation is there's got to be a time where they stop yelling, they leave or they go to sleep, right? And they apologize. But what if your stressor stays put, right? What if your particular thing that you're stressed out about and you feel out of control about, what if it's not giving you a break? Well, then we need to learn how to change our perspective or our perception. Like somebody that gets a terminal disease, if they feel out of control and stressed and afraid of it, right? And it doesn't go away, they're going to die fast. So what you'll notice is that the people that survive the longest when they get one of those labels are the people that, look, I forgot to look at these comments. Hey, Stacy, Tina, good to see you. Tess, what's up? Yeah, I want to give a shout out to all my boys that are in Lake Placid playing in this lacrosse tournament. I'm supposed to be there, and they're all mad at me because when you're 50 years old, you need a break from running. But because of the active stuff that's going on with our adoption of our little ducky, I can't take that time off. But shout out to all you guys. I hope you're not throwing up and upheaving too much. So the idea is that we have to, if we have that prolonged stuff that like can get ingrained and it's never going to end, well, then what you need to do is you need to rewire your brain and change your perception of it. And basically change your perception of it until it becomes something that, you perceive as something that is not a stressor, in your life. So things like breathing, meditation, and, my famous saying, are techniques that give us a new perspective on looking at an event. Always challenge yourself using some of those techniques to give yourself the opportunity to create a new perception of an event. So I always talk about holographic vision. the act of looking at things from all angles and gaining different perspectives does this too. So like that example with chicken, she had a stress response. She felt out of control. She said, ugh, my mom's not there. She told me she was going to be there. We stopped. We talked about it. We looked at it from all angles. We said, we created a different perspective. We recognized it wasn't in our control. We reclaimed control. Do you know that when you recognize something's out of your control and you release it, you reclaim control? So if you want to be a control freak, that's the simple way of doing it. So when it comes to reclaiming control, it's typically not reliant on the uncontrolled external event. Rather, it's our ability to switch and change our perception of it. Remember, the event is got a mind of its own, right? You can't change the external event. You can just work on yourself. And one of the things you can do is create a different perception of it, label it differently. That's why people will, in personal growth, will say things like, what's the lesson from it? What can I learn from this? Or rather than, there's a great book called Change the Conversation. When somebody attacks you, your amygdala fires off and you feel it. But what you can do is you can say, I wonder what they're struggling with, right? So that's that perception shift. And I teach that. So there's some interesting research done in the realm of what's called perceived control. Write this down. This is a powerful thing. Perceived control, which is very, very interface response system-esque. So the idea is real simple. I want to share this and we're almost at the end. The idea is simple. When we are facing stressful events in life, those that have some sort of structure, responsibility, like a morning routine, a rise up process, following a structured diet, taking care of animals, watering plants, they have a higher level of function and sense of control than those do not. What I'm saying is that the people that struggle the most with being out of control are the ones that have very, very minimal to no responsibility in life and structure. So what's cool about that is think about what you're doing right now. If you show up on Mondays and Fridays and you listen to this, it's part of your structure. It can give you perceived control. Now, I talk a lot about that. It's just a perception. If you don't put action behind it, nothing will change. But still, there's value. That's why we keep showing up. What's up, Cliff Hochberg? So one study that I read about observed that elderly people in a home, this is fascinating, in a home, they ran a test, and in essence, basically, they recognize that as we age, all of us, I'm 50, so I can acknowledge this. As we age, we have a tendency to feel more stressed and have this more of a feeling of being out of control. Typically, as we have less to do in life, that's one of the struggles. You're less capable of doing things. So what we have to look forward to, according to all my naysayer old friends, is they go, oh, you're going to love it. You're going to feel out of control and more stressed. Oh, I can't wait. So in this study, they gave one group in this elderly home. They basically went into this home and they looked at all of these tasks, like, putting the Parcheesi board away or watering plants or making their beds and all that stuff. They took one group and they said, we'll handle all of that. You guys are residents here. We'll take all of that. And they said, oh, thanks. And the other group, they said, we're going to have you guys do that at this time. And they put them in structure. And what they experienced from the two groups, and what I thought was kind of fucked up about this test, is that they kind of knew what the outcome was going to be. And the people that they put out of structure, they kind of screwed those people. Anyway, so the results were resounding, right? And they showed that those that had structured responsibilities experience much less stress and feeling of being out of control than the other group. So what's the value of learning how to do like my morning routine that I teach, taking my 15 days of discipline course, listening to this podcast, or just having a model morning, or following a structured program, or having anything that resembles you taking responsibility of your life, or like even joining me on Mondays and Fridays, like a lot of you do on different levels, potentially great response to that, as it may create perceived control. Now, perceived control is really interesting because what it says, the very act of me putting on my Magic Makes Sense glasses that I give out to a lot of people is when I put them on, it's an anchor in it, and it basically gives me the ability to see things as I want. It just gives me perceived control, gives me perceived, control over what I want to see. It's an anchor. But what's interesting about the perceived control thing is I also think that if you're out of control, I call it perceived out of control. So if we know that our brain has the ability to look at something negative or look at something in a positive way, and we know that two people can see things, the same thing differently, that means that they're both bullshit and they're both fantasies. But my question is which perceived fantasy suits you the best? So that's a big part of my system is you get to choose. That's why I put these glasses on. So remember, we're all wearing VR glasses, which is kind of what I choose these to be, and create whatever fantasy that we desire. So my truth right now, sometimes I wake up feeling I have panic attacks. I feel depressed and the weather is gloomy and I uncontrollably begin to boot up yesterday's program like a lot of you. But I'll admit that sometimes I will catch myself booting up yesterday's program and feeling frightened and anxiety and things like that. Right. But then all I have to do is tap into my structure, put my glasses on, say, how can I help? Say thank you, and practice the things that I do to create perceived control. And I do my rise up model morning and I say, right. So I look at that uneasy feeling and I don't buy into it, give it value. And I say, and I use my system and thank you. Right. Interesting. Right. I say, how can I help? Great morning. And then magically, this is what you have to look forward to. If you create perceived control with your structure, magically the clouds lift and the matrix, the game, the simulation, and it falls right in line with what I want to create when I put my glasses on. That's why my whole gimmick, right? And that's what I teach people. So anyway, love and appreciate you. I wrote a lot in this one. Remember, we've got some great guests coming up on Monday. If you're watching live, wait until you meet Jane and hear her story. You're going to feel wonderful about your situation. And she's really good at digging up some things that we've hidden. And then we'll have Doug Wood, and then we'll get into necessary. So love and appreciate you. We'll take it out right now. You can follow me on my podcast, Rise Up with Dragon. Find me on Instagram, Rise Up with Dragon. DM me if you want some glasses, some Make Sense glasses and a hat and things like that. Well, do something special to help us further this cause. Go give us a rating and a review, tag me, go shine your light bright for this mission called Rise Up with Dragon. And who knows, maybe you'll get a little treat. Love and appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Let's take it out.